Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about those who want to specialize in overhead pressing on conjugate instead of benching. And I want to go somewhere with this, and I want to make some points. And I'm not saying we can't do it, because we do it. I have at least one client who cares more about his overhead press. He's very serious about it, and so we even rotated into max effort work. But that being said, should you really do that simply because you, quote, don't compete in powerlifting? Well, that's not necessarily a good idea, and here's why. Most guys who are out there are trying to get more jacked or more athletic, even if they use this system and they don't compete in powerlifting, because I've said this system works for every goal. But generally speaking, you want a bigger chest and a bigger upper body. You want a stronger chest and a stronger upper body. I'm not saying you even have to get to bodybuilder proportions on your pecs. But the thing is, okay, so you don't compete with the bench press in competition. So I would say to that same person, do you compete in the overhead press in competition? That's a big one. Like, well, no. So why do you care about the overhead press more than the bench? Furthermore, let's say you do go into strength lifting, which is starting strength sport they started, which has the press instead of the bench in it. How many of the guys have you heard say, including like even the guys at Barbell Logic, that they use the closed grip bench press as an accessory to the press? Well, if you're using it as an accessory to the press because it increases the overhead press quite effectively, wouldn't that mean like our closed grip speed benching and all of that would carry over? Of course it would. Okay. And I'm not saying you can't do some speed work on the press, but if you're completely cutting out your speed work and your chest pressing and everything else for the chest and any of your benching, do you think that that's wise? You don't think that's going to create a potential strength and muscle imbalance? And wouldn't the speed benching with the closed grip carry over to the press effectively? Of course it would. I might suggest that if a person doesn't care that much about benching and they really and truly care about their press and they're going to compete in the press, okay, it might make sense to rotate speed bench and speed press. But if you're trying to get as big and as jacked and as strong as possible, I wouldn't recommend that. Not necessarily. You could consider it, but you don't want to shortchange your chest pressing. You don't want to have entire weeks where you're not doing presses for your chest. At the very least, you're going to want a closed grip bench every week. Okay. The lifts we might remove and not do, you might not do a lot of floor pressing or dumbbell chest pressing and things like that. Okay, that might make more sense to not need those if you're not going to bench as much. Or you don't care about the bench, you care more about the overhead press, but you're going to want a closed grip bench. You're going to want to do a lot of speed bench still with the closed grip. Right, it makes sense. And here's more or less what I do with one of my guys. I have a guy who's set some very lofty press goals. He, by the way, at his current body weight, he can press his own body weight, actually slightly more. But he cares about the press a lot. Like, it's one of his goal lifts. It's a big deal to him. He doesn't compete in anything. Also a personal trainer himself. And he wants, obviously, big jack shoulders and everything because he's natural and he's a personal trainer. So he needs the extra shoulder for what he does. Something a lot of you guys can relate to. I mean, the guys who want a certain look, yeah, having big jack shoulders, especially if you're drug-free, is harder to do. So pressing and things like that become a big deal. But do you think that's all we do for him? You think that's all we do for his shoulders? No. We do a lot of other shoulder work for this same guy. We do laterals. We do upright rows. Right? Because how is he going to get jacked shoulders? How are you going to maximize shoulder development? If you're a guy who really cares about his shoulder development, we're going to do these other things. I do, and I'm trying to grow my shoulders. I know they've been, in some cases, a weak link for me. But you're going to want to build the whole shoulder girdle. All three heads of the delt. The entire trap. Okay, you're gonna want to focus on all of that if you want big shoulders. And pressing can be a big part of it, but it's not going to cover it by itself. Not all that you need. So let's come back over to that point. Does max benching and speed benching help increase your standing press? Of course they do. Of course they do. I dare anyone to argue otherwise. Max effort work is max effort work, as long as it's for similar enough muscle groups. Okay. In theory, a person can do all their max work and their speed work, or the vast majority of both, with bench variations. And as long as they build the muscles of the press up, they're going to have a very, very good 1 rep max on the press. All right? Of course they are. You could run the standard conjugate templates in ME and DE type work, and you could do a lot more shoulder work. You could make sure that you overhead press for volume every week. Why? Because that's going to give you the most hypertrophy of the muscles of the press, and then do some extra specialized delt work. What do we mean by that? Lateral raises, upright rows, things like that. Rear delt work, trap work, right? Building that area up is going to make you good at the press. Now, that being said, could you incorporate some other stuff for maxes and things? Of course you could. So let's talk about what I do with my guy who really cares about his press. It's a big deal to him. And he'll catch this video. He'll know I'm talking about him. All right. We max on incline bench for him. We max on the overhead press for him. We max with pin overhead presses for him, like dead pin presses overhead. Over half of his max work is still benching. I would say on average, 2/3 to 3/4 of his max effort work, right, is benching. We rotate the others in. You know, maybe about every third or fourth week, we do some sort of overhead press max. It could be his standard shoulder width grip. It could be the really, really wide grip. Could be a pin overhead press. We could switch bars for someone who has access to different bars, right? You could do axle bar overhead. You could do football bar overhead. You could do a push press. So we have all these variations. You can work them in just like the benching, but you're not doing those just every week. I'm going to say, even for someone who cares tremendously about the press, if you competed in the press, I still wouldn't have more than half of your max effort work be pressing. The other half needs to be benching. Now, incline finds a nice middle ground in there. You could do some, definitely incline will carry over to both to some extent for max work. Okay. And then lots of volume. Lots of volume work. And maybe occasionally work in a wave. So what would I do for someone who says, I don't care at all about my bench, but obviously I want to be as big and strong as possible? Well, benching is kind of necessary. Chest pressing is necessary. Be as big and as strong as possible. But I want to compete in the press. Well, in that case, I might say, let's do half of your max work as chest pressing, and the other half as overhead pressing. And I might rotate waves of speed work. I might have them do 3-week wave of closed grip benching speed, 3-week wave of overhead pressing speed. Okay, but this is for specialization. This is for someone who literally really cares about their overhead press way more than their bench. Like, it's a high priority for them for some reason, hopefully in a competitive environment. Because guys say, well, if you're doing it just because one guy said, well, I want to have big shoulders as a natural. Well, get in and do volume work for your shoulders, right? Like, if you have a muscle that you really care about, get in and train it. Do volume work for that muscle. You don't need to specialize your max effort work around that muscle, because the entire body gets worked pretty well off of our speed work. Like, if you're doing speed boxes, speed pulls, speed benching every week, most of the body's being worked from a speed perspective. You're training the whole body. You don't want to start training the less of the body. But if you have a muscle that needs more work, then train it directly. Look, I mean, I hate to have to tell people this. Yes, I push big, heavy movements. That's what I'm into. I still do single joint exercises. I program single joint exercises and small movements for my clients. Even ones who don't care about their looks per se either. We train these things. If you have a muscle that you need to grow and it's not growing proportionate to the rate that you want it to grow, you probably want to do some single joint movements for it. It would be a good idea. Hey, if your side delt isn't growing fast enough, you need to get in and throw in 10 more sets for it every week. Let's be realistic. You need to throw in 5 sets for it probably on both of your upper body days if it's really lagging and you need it to grow, of smaller movements, right? That's common sense. Same thing. If your biceps are lagging, you probably need to do some curls. Some guys get massive biceps off nothing but rowing. I'm not one of them. There are guys who do. But if you're not one of those guys and you want bigger biceps, and train your biceps, it should be common sense. So you don't stand there and go, well, I'm going to mess with the whole system because I want bigger delts. No, train your delts more. Train your shoulders more. It shouldn't be difficult. That's not a hard concept to grasp. It's not exactly rocket science. The difference comes in of specializing when you literally care about having a competitive lift on the overhead press. And it matters. And it might matter for like strongmen and stuff too. Right? But even then, we still wouldn't remove the chest pressing. We just specialize a little more. Alright guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.